My mother-in-law stood over my hospital bed, looked at my newborn twins, and slid a check for $2 million across my tray table. She told me to name my price, leave the hospital alone, and surrender the Hayes heirs. She truly believed her $25 million fortune could erase me from existence. I pulled my babies closer, looked her dead in the eye, and told her to keep her money. By sunrise, the woman who tried to buy my children had lost absolutely everything. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled her empire, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? Drop a comment and let me know. The air in the recovery room was thick with the smell of clinical antiseptic and the quiet, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. It had been exactly 48 hours since I was rushed into an emergency C-section. My body felt like it had been split in half and stitched back together with barbed wire. Every breath I took sent a sharp, agonizing pull through my abdomen. But none of the physical pain compared to the absolute dread that washed over me when the heavy wooden door of my private hospital suite swung open. It was not a nurse coming to check my vitals. It was not a lactation consultant offering help. It was Beatrice Hayes. My mother-in-law did not carry a bouquet of balloons or a stuffed teddy bear. She did not wear the warm, exhausted smile of a grandmother coming to meet her new grandsons. Beatrice wore a pristine, tailored Chanel suit, her silver hair pulled back into a severe twist that allowed no room for error. Her heels clicked against the linoleum floor with the sharp, measured cadence of a corporate executive arriving at a hostile acquisition. She carried a sleek leather designer handbag clutched tightly in her manicured hands. My husband Julian was sitting in the corner of the room on a vinyl visitor chair. When his mother walked in, he immediately stood up. He did not go to her and hug her. He simply straightened his posture and crossed his hands in front of him, looking more like an obedient subordinate than a proud new father. I shifted in the hospital bed, gritting my teeth as a wave of pain rolled through my stomach. I reached out and rested my hands protectively over the clear plastic bassinets parked right beside my bed. Inside, my twin boys were sleeping, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect unison. They were so small, so fragile, completely oblivious to the coldness that had just walked into the room. Beatrice stopped at the foot of my bed. She did not look at the babies. She looked directly at me. Her pale blue eyes were devoid of any warmth or basic human empathy. "Claire," she said, her voice dropping into the quiet room like a stone into freezing water. "Let us dispense with the pleasantries. You and I both know you do not belong in this family. You never did." I stared at her, my throat suddenly dry. "Beatrice," I whispered, my voice raspy from the intubation tube they had removed just a day ago. "What are you talking about? My sons were just born." "They are Hayes heirs," Beatrice corrected sharply. "They carry my family name. They represent the future of our legacy. You, on the other hand, represent a temporary lapse in Julian's judgment. A compliance auditor from a middle-class neighborhood was never meant to be a permanent fixture in our lives. We allowed this marriage because Julian insisted it was love. But bringing children into this equation changes the financial and social landscape entirely." I looked over at Julian, expecting him to intervene, expecting him to step forward, throw his arm toward the door, and demand that his mother leave his wife and his newborn children in peace. I waited for the man I married to protect us. Julian did not move. He kept his eyes fixed firmly on the tips of his expensive leather shoes. The silence in the room stretched out thick and suffocating. "Julian," I croaked out, panic beginning to claw its way up my throat. "Julian, tell her to get out." Julian shifted his weight. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing, but he still refused to meet my gaze. "Claire," he mumbled softly, practically whispering to the floor. "Mother might have a point. We have to think about what is best for the family legacy. The boys are going to need resources, connections, a certain standard of living that you just do not understand." The words hit me harder than the surgeon's scalpel. My own husband, the man who had held my hand while I pushed the man who had cried when he heard their first cries, was standing in the corner agreeing with his mother that I was unfit to raise my own children simply because I did not come from generational wealth. He was never my partner. He was just his mother's employee waiting for his next set of instructions. Beatrice did not even look at her son. She simply unclasped her leather handbag and pulled out a heavy embossed checkbook. She retrieved a gold fountain pen from her breast pocket. The sound of the pen scratching against the thick paper seemed to echo off the sterile hospital walls. It was a precise, calculated sound. She tore the check from the book with a sharp rip and stepped up to the side of my bed. Without a word of hesitation, she slid the piece of paper across my rolling tray table. It stopped right next to my plastic water pitcher. I looked down. The check was written out to Claire Hayes. The amount was $2 million. "I am a generous woman," Beatrice said, her tone perfectly, even as if she were negotiating a real estate contract. $2 million is more money than you will ever see in your lifetime of crunching numbers for corporate compliance. It is enough for you to buy a nice house in whatever average neighborhood you prefer, take a few vacations, and live comfortably. My hands began to shake, not from fear but from a deep primal rage that was rapidly boiling up from the center of my chest. I looked from the check to her cold, unblinking eyes. "What is this for, Beatrice?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave, losing all its previous weakness. "It is your exit package," she replied smoothly. "You will take that check. You will pack your personal belongings. You will walk out of this hospital room alone. You will sign the full custody surrender forms my legal team is drafting right now, and you will never contact Julian or these children again. You get $2 million. We keep the Hayes heirs. Everyone walks away with exactly what they want." I stared at the woman. I stared at the zeros on the crisp paper. $2 million to erase myself from my own life. $2 million to abandon the two tiny lives I had literally just been cut open to bring into this world. She actually believed that because she controlled a $25 million fortune, she could put a price tag on my motherhood. I reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the check. Beatrice offered a small, victorious smirk, clearly believing that her wealth had won again. Julian finally looked up from his shoes, letting out a heavy sigh of relief, thinking the messy part was over. I looked at the check. I noted the routing number. I noted the corporate account it was drawn from. My auditor brain cataloged every detail in a fraction of a second. Then, holding their precious $2 million bribe in both hands, I slowly and deliberately tore it directly down the middle. Beatrice's smirk vanished. I placed the two halves together and tore them again, letting the shredded pieces of her bribe flutter down onto the stark white hospital blanket covering my lap. "You must be out of your mind," Beatrice hissed, taking a step back, genuine shock finally cracking her perfect facade. "Keep your money," I said. My voice was no longer shaking. The pain in my abdomen faded into the background, completely overridden by the fierce protective instinct of a mother cornered by predators. "You are going to need every single penny of it." I reached out and slammed my palm down on the red nurse call button strapped to the bed rail. I did not just press it. I held it down, sending a continuous emergency tone ringing out into the hospital hallway. "Get out of my room," I commanded, pointing a shaking finger toward the heavy wooden door. "Both of you, get out right now before I have hospital security physically drag you into the street." Julian finally stepped forward, his face pale with sudden panic. "Claire, please be reasonable. Do not make a scene. Mother is just trying to make sure the boys are protected." I turned my glare to the man I thought I loved. "You do not get to speak to me ever again, Julian. Get out." The door flew open and two nurses rushed in, their eyes darting around the room to assess the emergency. I did not miss a beat. I pointed directly at Beatrice and Julian. "These people are threatening me and trying to take my children. I want them removed from this hospital immediately, and I want them permanently banned from the maternity ward." The older nurse immediately stepped between my bed and Beatrice, her posture defensive and firm. "Ma'am, sir, you need to step outside right now." Beatrice drew herself up to her full height, smoothing the front of her Chanel jacket. She looked at me with a gaze so venomous it could have frozen boiling water. "You have made a catastrophic mistake today, Claire. You have no idea what kind of war you have just started. You will leave this hospital with absolutely nothing." She turned on her heel and marched out the door. Julian cast one last pathetic, cowardly glance at me before scurrying out right behind his mother like a frightened child following orders. The nurses stayed with me. They checked my vitals. They locked the door from the inside. They assured me that security had been notified and that my room was now restricted access. For 10 brief minutes, I held my twin boys to my chest, breathing in the sweet, powdery scent of their newborn skin. I cried silent tears into their tiny cotton hats, promising them that no one was ever going to take them away from me. I thought the worst was over. I thought the confrontation had ended. I was completely wrong. Exactly 10 minutes later, a sharp, authoritative knock sounded at the door. The nurse unlocked it, expecting a security guard to give an update. Instead, a tall man in a gray business suit walked in holding a sterile clipboard. Beside him stood a woman carrying a thick folder, her expression grave and judgmental. "Mrs. Hayes," the man said, not bothering to introduce himself warmly. "I am the hospital administrator for patient accounts. This is Ms. Gable, the head of medical social services for the pediatric wing." I felt my heart drop into my stomach. "Yes," I said cautiously, pulling the blankets tighter around my babies. "How can I help you?" "I am afraid there has been a significant change in your status," the administrator said, tapping his pen against his clipboard. "As of 10 minutes ago, we received a direct notification from the primary policyholder of your premium health insurance. The policy, which is controlled by Hayes Corporate Holdings, has been abruptly canceled. Effective immediately, you have no medical coverage at this facility." My breath caught in my throat. Canceled. They cannot just cancel my insurance while I am actively recovering from major surgery. "According to the corporate policy terms, they can," the administrator replied coldly. "Because you are uninsured and medically stable according to your last chart, update hospital policy dictates that we must discharge you immediately. We need this private suite for insured patients. You have 1 hour to pack your belongings and vacate the premises." 1 hour. I was barely able to walk to the bathroom without assistance. My boys were premature, requiring constant monitoring. I looked at the social worker, Ms. Gable, desperately hoping for a voice of reason. Ms. Gable stepped forward, opening her thick folder. "Mrs. Hayes, the abrupt cancellation of your insurance is only part of the issue. We have also received a highly concerning report from a prominent family member regarding your current state." "What report?" I asked, my voice trembling again. "The report states that you are exhibiting signs of severe postpartum instability." Ms. Gable said, her tone dripping with professional condescension. "It claims you are acting erratically, screaming at relatives and making delusional accusations. Given that you are now uninsured, lacking family support, and exhibiting erratic behavior, I have been flagged to assess the safety of these infants. We have serious concerns about your mental stability and your financial capacity to provide care." I stared at the 2 hospital officials standing at the foot of my bed. Beatrice had not just walked away. In the 10 minutes since I tore up her check, she had orchestrated a surgical strike on my life. She cut off my medical care to force me onto the street while I was physically broken. Then she planted a fabricated mental health crisis with the hospital social worker laying the exact legal groundwork she needed to seize my children the moment I walked out those double doors. The hospital was no longer a place of healing. It had become a trap. Beatrice wanted to prove that I was destitute and crazy, and she was using the very hospital system her family funded to do it. I had exactly 1 hour to get my newborn babies out of this building before Beatrice's carefully laid trap closed around us forever. I had exactly 60 minutes to get my children out of that hospital before Beatrice used the system to steal them. I ignored the searing pain radiating from my surgical incision. I threw the mesh recovery garments, the tiny diapers, and the sample bottles of formula into my overnight bag. My hands were shaking, but my mind was entirely clear. Ms. Gable stood by the door with her clipboard, watching my every move, waiting for me to scream or cry or do anything that she could document as unstable behavior. I did not give her the satisfaction. I spoke in a quiet, measured voice. I asked the attending nurse to call a cab to the private rear exit. I requested copies of all the medical discharge paperwork for the babies. I strapped my tiny sons into their car seats with hands that moved on pure maternal adrenaline. When the cab finally arrived, I did not look back at the building. I gave the driver our home address and sank into the vinyl back seat. The ride took 30 long minutes. I spent every single minute whispering to my sleeping boys, promising them that no one was going to tear us apart. The cab pulled into our quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. This was the house Julian and I had picked out together. It was a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial with a wrap-around porch and a massive oak tree in the front yard. I had painted the nursery a soft sage green just 3 weeks ago, filling it with stuffed animals and warm blankets. I paid the cab driver with the last of the physical cash in my wallet, thanked him for helping me lift the heavy car seats onto the driveway, and watched his taillights disappear down the street. I took a deep breath, trying to push through the burning sensation in my stomach, and turned around to face my home. That was when I saw it. Pounded directly into the center of my perfectly manicured front lawn was a massive wooden sign, "For sale." The words were printed in bold black letters above the logo of the most exclusive real estate agency in the city. My heart stopped beating in my chest. I grabbed the heavy car seats, ignoring the sharp tearing sensation in my abdomen, and forced myself to walk up the brick pathway to the front door. I set the babies down gently on the porch swing. I reached into my purse and pulled out my house key. I slid the metal key into the brass deadbolt. It did not turn. I pulled it out and tried again, pushing harder this time, hoping the metal was simply caught. The key would not budge. The locks were entirely new. I stepped back and looked at the front door. Taped to the polished wood, right at eye level, was a laminated legal notice. I read the words, and the ground seemed to fall away from beneath my feet. The notice stated that this property was exclusively owned by a subsidiary of Hayes Corporate Holdings. It stated that all unauthorized occupants had been legally evicted. It explicitly listed my name, Claire Hayes, warning that any attempt to enter the premises would be prosecuted as criminal trespassing. I pressed my face against the front window and peered into the living room. It was completely empty. My comfortable furniture was gone. The framed wedding photos on the mantel were gone. Julian had not just agreed with his mother at the hospital. He had spent the last 48 hours actively packing up his life, changing the locks, and erasing my existence from this house. He had always told me the house was in a family trust purely for tax purposes. I believed him because husbands and wives are supposed to trust each other. I did not realize the family trust was a loaded weapon designed to render me homeless at a moment's notice. Most people would have collapsed on that porch. Most people would have fallen to their knees, pounded their fists against the locked door, and dissolved into a puddle of tears. Beatrice was counting on exactly that reaction. She was waiting for the neighbors to see me. She was waiting for the police to be called for a noise complaint. She was waiting for a documented public breakdown to prove to the family court judge that I was an unstable, homeless woman who could not provide basic shelter for 2 premature infants. Beatrice made one massive miscalculation. She forgot what I do for a living. I am a corporate compliance auditor. My entire career is built on finding hidden money, bypassing corporate roadblocks, and tracing financial footprints that wealthy people want buried. I spend 50 hours a week analyzing ledgers, flagging fraudulent transactions, and dismantling complex financial structures. I do not panic. I audit. I sat down on the cold wooden slats of the porch swing next to my sleeping babies. I pulled my heavy laptop out of my hospital bag. I connected the computer to the secure cellular hotspot I always carry for field audits. I opened the screen and let the analytical side of my brain take complete control of my physical fear. Beatrice had locked me out of the house and she had canceled my health insurance. Her next logical step would be to freeze all the joint bank accounts to completely starve me out. But it was Friday afternoon. Corporate lawyers are incredibly fast, but banking compliance systems take time to process comprehensive asset freezes, especially across different financial institutions and international time zones. I knew I had a window. It was a very small window, probably closing by the minute, but it was open right now. I logged into my encrypted digital cloud. I bypassed the standard consumer banking portals and accessed our joint accounts through the direct routing interfaces I used for our personal tax compliance. The balances were still there. Julian and I had a joint savings account. The vast majority of the money in that account came from my own corporate salary, not his family allowance, because Julian spent his allowance on luxury watches and sports cars. There was roughly $80,000 sitting in liquid cash in that account. I did not hesitate. I opened an offshore holding account I had set up years ago for an international audit project. It was an entirely legal financial vehicle, perfectly secure and completely invisible to Beatrice's aggressive legal team. I initiated a direct wire transfer for $75,000. I watched the progress bar load on my screen, my heart pounding in my ears. My hands hovered over the keyboard as the banking system authenticated the emergency request. The screen flashed green. Transfer successful. I exhaled a long, shaky breath. I was not destitute. I had capital. I immediately opened a secure corporate rental application and booked a high-security, fully furnished executive apartment in a commercial district downtown. It was an anonymous glass building with underground parking, keycard elevator access, and 24-hour concierge security. I booked the lease under a limited liability company I used for my freelance consulting work. Beatrice could hire expensive private investigators to scour the city, but they would never find my name on any residential lease. I had shelter. I had secured funding. I picked up my phone and ordered a private black car service to take us from this empty porch to the new apartment. But as I sat on the porch, waiting for the car to arrive, my auditor instincts kept pulling my eyes back to the glowing screen of my laptop. Something was bothering me. Something I had seen during the transfer process was itching at the back of my mind. When I transferred the funds out of the joint accounts, the banking interface had displayed the recent deposit history from Julian's trust distributions. Julian received a large monthly stipend from the Hayes Family Trust. He always bragged about the $25 million fortune sitting safely in his mother's domestic corporate accounts. I pulled up the raw routing data from his last 3 trust deposits. I stared at the string of numbers on the screen. My brow furrowed. I ran the routing prefixes through a global financial database I kept bookmarked on my desktop. The numbers did not match standard domestic banks. They did not originate from Hayes Corporate Holdings in any legitimate American jurisdiction. The money was bouncing through a highly complex series of layered international prefixes: Cayman Islands, Delaware shell companies, Isle of Man holding accounts. The money was being aggressively washed before it ever reached Julian's account. The $25 million fortune was not sitting in a standard family trust. It was being routed through dark financial channels to obscure its true origin and tax liability. Beatrice was not just a cruel, wealthy matriarch who hated her daughter-in-law. She was actively hiding massive corporate assets, and she was doing it using highly illegal corporate structuring. She was committing major federal tax fraud. The moment I fully grasped the magnitude of what I was looking at, a sharp chime echoed from my laptop speakers. A new email had just arrived in my primary inbox. The sender was a senior partner at the most ruthless family law firm in the state. The subject line read, "Notice of Emergency Ex Parte Custody Filing." I opened the email with trembling fingers. My eyes scanned the attached legal document. Beatrice and Julian had officially filed a petition for emergency full custody of the twins. The grounds for the emergency order were typed out in bold black letters. The petition claimed that I had been discharged from the hospital against medical advice with no medical coverage, no financial resources, and no permanent residence. They were using the exact homelessness that they had intentionally manufactured just 2 hours ago as the legal justification to take my children away from me. The document stated that an emergency hearing was scheduled for Monday morning in family court. I had exactly 72 hours to prepare for a courtroom ambush designed to strip me of my motherhood forever. A sleek black town car pulled into the driveway. I closed my laptop and slid it safely into my leather bag. I looked down at my 2 beautiful boys in their carriers. They were sleeping so peacefully, entirely unaware of the massive, devastating war that had just been declared over their tiny heads. Beatrice thought she had outsmarted a helpless, overly emotional mother. She thought she could bury me under her wealth and her power. She was about to find out what happens when you corner a corporate compliance auditor who has absolutely nothing left to lose. I picked up the car seats, walked away from the locked door of my former life, and stepped into the back of the waiting car. The real fight had just begun. 72 hours is exactly 4,320 minutes. When you are nursing premature twins and recovering from major abdominal surgery, every single minute feels like carrying boulders underwater. I spent my entire weekend locked inside the anonymous corporate apartment. I slept in 20-minute increments. I fed my boys, changed their tiny diapers, rocked them to sleep, and then dragged my aching body back to my laptop. The cold blue light of the screen was my only companion in the dark. I was not just building a legal defense, I was building a digital guillotine. I combed through every server log, every insurance termination notice, and every property document attached to the Hayes family name. I downloaded the exact timestamps of their actions. I compiled a forensic timeline that left absolutely no room for alternative interpretations. I gathered the evidence of my own corporate salary, my clean financial history, and my secure housing lease. I needed legal representation immediately, but I could not walk into a prestigious downtown law firm. Beatrice had the high society legal community in her pocket. Any top-tier lawyer would likely have a conflict of interest or a quiet loyalty to Hayes Corporate Holdings. I needed someone entirely outside her sphere of influence. I found Harrison Tate. Harrison operated out of a cramped, water-stained office above a dry cleaner on the edge of the industrial district. He wore suits that were slightly shiny at the elbows, and he drank cheap coffee out of a dented styrofoam cup. But when I laid my financial audit on his scratched wooden desk, his eyes sharpened. He did not see me as a hysterical postpartum mother crying over a broken marriage. He saw me as a corporate auditor handing him a loaded weapon. Harrison despised wealthy bullies who weaponized the courts to crush ordinary people. He took my case immediately and told me to get some sleep. I told him I would sleep when my children were safe. Monday morning arrived with heavy gray clouds hanging over the city. I wore a tailored navy blue suit. I strapped a medical compression binder tightly around my healing abdomen to force myself to stand perfectly straight. I pushed my boys in their dual stroller through the heavy metal doors of the family court building. Every step sent a jolt of fire through my stomach, but I refused to show a single ounce of weakness. I was not the victim they desperately wanted me to be. Beatrice glided into the courthouse waiting area like she was attending a royal coronation. She wore a pristine white designer suit and a diamond necklace that caught the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hallway. She was flanked by a team of 3 high-priced attorneys carrying premium leather briefcases. They moved in perfect unison, looking exactly like sharks circling a drop of blood in the water. Julian trailed several paces behind them. He wore a rumpled suit and kept his eyes fixed firmly on his expensive loafers. He looked pathetic, playing the role of the aggrieved, deeply concerned father while his mother directed the slaughter. Beatrice did not even look at my stroller. She looked right through me, her chin raised in absolute triumph. She believed she had already won. Inside the courtroom, the air was suffocatingly tense. The judge took his seat looking exhausted by the endless morning parade of family disputes. Beatrice's lead attorney, a man with silver hair and a voice like smooth velvet, stood up to present their emergency petition. He painted a horrifying, meticulously fabricated picture of my life. He spoke with deep, practiced concern as he told the judge that I was a manipulative opportunist who had married into wealth and completely snapped under the pressure of motherhood. He claimed I had fled the hospital against medical advice in a dangerous fit of postpartum psychosis. He stated on the public record that I had kidnapped the Hayes heirs and was currently hiding in an anonymous transient rental property. He deliberately made my secure, high-end corporate apartment sound like a dangerous, unmonitored flophouse unfit for human habitation. He submitted the hospital social worker report to the judge, heavily highlighting my alleged mental instability and erratic behavior during my discharge. He gestured dramatically toward Julian, claiming the father was terrified for the immediate physical safety of his fragile newborn sons. Beatrice sat perfectly still at the petitioner's table, occasionally dabbing her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief to complete the performance. They asked the judge to immediately grant them full physical and legal custody to protect the infants from my supposed destitution and mental collapse. I sat beside Harrison, keeping my face entirely blank. I did not gasp. I did not shake my head in denial. I did not interrupt their lies. I knew from my auditing background that any display of emotional outrage would be used instantly by their team to validate their false narrative of my instability. I simply folded my hands on the wooden table and waited for them to finish digging their own grave. The judge turned his stern gaze to our table, waiting for our defense. Harrison Tate stood up, adjusting his cheap tie, and addressed the court with quiet, absolute confidence. He told the judge we did not need to defend my character or my mental state, because the petitioner's own digital footprints told the undeniable truth. Harrison formally introduced me to the court, not as an unemployed desperate mother, but as a certified corporate compliance auditor. He walked confidently up to the bench and submitted my sworn legal affidavit, along with a thick, heavily bound folder containing my comprehensive digital audit. I watched Beatrice's lead attorney narrow his eyes in confusion as the judge opened the folder. Harrison walked the judge through the exact timeline of Friday afternoon, pointing directly to the digital timestamps highlighted in yellow marker. My client did not flee the hospital in a state of psychosis, Harrison stated, his voice ringing clearly across the quiet courtroom. The Hayes family deliberately and maliciously canceled her premium health insurance exactly 10 minutes after she refused a $2 million bribe from her mother-in-law to abandon her children. Beatrice stiffened in her padded chair. Her attorney jumped up to object loudly, calling the claim absurd and entirely baseless, but the judge raised a hand to silence him immediately. The judge was staring intently at the printed insurance termination logs. Harrison continued without missing a single beat. He directed the judge to page 4 of the audit. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the health insurance was terminated by a Hayes corporate proxy account. At 2 o'clock, the locks on my client's marital home were changed by a commercial locksmith hired directly by a Hayes subsidiary, rendering her legally locked out without any prior notice. And at 3 o'clock, this very emergency custody petition was filed, citing the exact homelessness that Beatrice Hayes and Julian Hayes had systematically and intentionally engineered. The evidence sitting in front of the judge was irrefutable. Bank routing access logs, commercial lockout receipts, and corporate insurance termination timestamps do not lie. They do not care about diamond necklaces or high-priced attorneys making dramatic speeches. They paint a cold, clear, undeniable picture of premeditated financial abuse. Harrison concluded his presentation by stating that this was not a child welfare emergency in any capacity. It was a hostile corporate takeover of 2 human lives, orchestrated by a wealthy grandmother attempting to weaponize the family court system to steal her grandsons. The judge flipped through the final pages of the audit in total silence. He closed the heavy folder slowly. The atmosphere in the room had shifted entirely from routine boredom to electric tension. The judge glared directly at Beatrice and her team of expensive sharks. He explicitly stated for the court record that he does not look favorably upon wealthy families manufacturing crises to circumvent the legal process and terrorize young mothers. He declared that the petitioners had utterly failed to prove that the infants were in any immediate danger whatsoever. He struck his heavy wooden gavel and officially denied Beatrice's request for emergency custody. He formally granted me temporary primary custody of my sons. For a split second, I felt a massive wave of relief wash over my exhausted body. I had kept my baby safe. I had survived the ambush. But Beatrice was incredibly wealthy, and the legal system is a massive machine that runs entirely on money. Her lead attorney, realizing the emergency petition was dead, immediately pivoted his strategy to ensure they maintained control over my life. He argued forcefully that even if the immediate emergency request was denied, the court still had an absolute legal obligation to ensure the infants were in a safe environment, given the drastic and sudden change in my living situation, my physical recovery, and my pending divorce. He demanded a full comprehensive investigation into my overall capacity to parent alone. The judge, bound by strict family court procedures regarding newborn safety in high-conflict divorces, agreed to a legal compromise. He ordered a comprehensive, highly invasive psychological and financial evaluation of my entire life. I would be subjected to surprise home inspections by court-appointed guardians at any hour of the day or night. My personal bank accounts and corporate consulting ledgers would be heavily scrutinized. I would have to undergo mandated psychological profiling sessions to legally prove I was fit to raise my own children. The judge set the final permanent custody trial for exactly 3 months from today. He had just handed Beatrice a 90-day window to use her limitless financial resources to destroy my life completely. Court officially adjourned. I carefully maneuvered the heavy dual stroller out of the large mahogany doors and into the echoing hallway of the courthouse. My body was screaming in physical agony, but my grip on the stroller handle was like solid iron. Beatrice dismissed her team of lawyers with a sharp, angry wave of her manicured hand. She did not look defeated in the slightest. She looked energized by the challenge. She walked directly up to me, stopping just inches away from the stroller. Julian lingered near the public elevators, too cowardly to even approach his own children or look his wife in the eye. Beatrice leaned in close to my face. The cloying scent of her expensive floral perfume mixed with the stale metallic air of the courthouse hallway, making me feel nauseous. "You think you won a great victory today, Claire?" she whispered. Her voice was laced with absolute venom, entirely devoid of the polished charm she used for her high society friends. "You think a few printed timestamps make you clever? But you have no idea how this game is actually played." I stood perfectly still, meeting her cold blue eyes without flinching, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing my fear. Beatrice smiled a terrible, hollow smile that did not reach her eyes. "I am going to bury you in endless litigation," she promised softly. "I will order deposition after deposition until you cannot afford to buy formula for those babies. I will hire private investigators to watch every single move you make. I will drag this out until your cheap lawyer quits and your savings are completely drained. I will bankrupt you in legal fees until you are absolutely broken. And when you have nothing left, you will come crawling to my doorstep begging me to take them off your hands." The 90-day window the family court judge had given Beatrice felt like a ticking time bomb strapped to my chest. Every single time my phone buzzed or a shadow passed by the window of my secure corporate apartment, my heart slammed against my ribs. I was living in a constant state of hypervigilance. I kept all the blinds drawn. I ordered my groceries through encrypted delivery apps using prepaid gift cards. I only left the building for mandated legal appointments and pediatric checkups for my twin boys. I thought I had built an impenetrable fortress. I thought the underground parking garage with its keycard access and heavy steel gates would keep the Hayes family out. I underestimated just how much cash Beatrice was willing to burn to bypass security protocols. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when I pulled my car into my assigned concrete parking space. I had just returned from a stressful weight check appointment for the boys. I turned off the engine and took a deep breath, preparing to unbuckle the heavy car seats and carry them to the secure elevator. I opened my driver's side door and stepped out into the damp, echoing garage. A car door slammed loudly behind me. I spun around my hand, instantly flying to the handle of the stroller in my trunk. Parked illegally across 2 visitor spaces was a basic metallic gray sedan. A man was stepping out of the driver's side, adjusting the collar of his suit jacket. It was not Julian. It was his older brother, Preston Hayes. Julian was the cowardly, compliant younger sibling who stared at his shoes and did whatever his mother commanded. Preston was the aggressive, entitled golden boy of the Hayes family. He was the heir apparent, the man who was supposed to take over Hayes corporate holdings. He was also a notorious, reckless gambler who spent most of his time flying between high-stakes poker tables in Las Vegas and exclusive underground casinos in Macau. He usually drove a custom black Porsche and treated everyone outside his tax bracket like dirt on the bottom of his shoe. Preston walked slowly across the concrete floor, positioning his large frame directly between my car and the elevator bank. He smiled, but it was a vicious, predatory expression that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Hello, Claire," Preston said, his voice echoing off the concrete pillars. "You are a very hard woman to track down. My mother had to bribe 3 different property managers just to find out which anonymous corporate lease belonged to the runaway auditor." I stood my ground. I did not reach for my phone. I did not scream for help. I knew the security cameras were rolling, but I also knew that showing panic would give him exactly what he wanted. I kept my body positioned squarely between him and the back seat of my car, where my sons were sleeping. "You are trespassing on a secure property, Preston," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and flat. "You have exactly 10 seconds to get back into your car and drive away before I trigger the building emergency system." Preston laughed loudly, tossing his head back. "You are not going to trigger anything, Claire. You are going to stand there and listen to me. Because if you make a scene, it is only going to add to the massive file my mother is building against you. She sent me here to deliver a message, and you are going to hear it loud and clear." He took a step closer, invading my personal space. The harsh fluorescent lights of the garage cast deep, aggressive shadows across his face. "You got lucky in court on Monday," he sneered. "You tricked a tired judge with some printed spreadsheets, but your little victory tour is over. My mother is done playing nice. Starting tomorrow morning, we are sending Child Protective Services to this address. And we are not just sending them once. We are sending them every single day. We have anonymous witnesses lined up who are going to claim they hear babies screaming from your unit. We have people ready to swear they saw you drinking heavily in the middle of the day. They will raid your home. They will drug test you. They will tear apart every single drawer and cabinet in this pathetic little apartment. They will interrogate you until you crack. And when you finally make one wrong move, when you finally raise your voice or cry in front of a social worker, we will take those boys away from you forever." He leaned in closer, his breath hot against my face. "You cannot fight our money, Claire. You are a nobody. Save yourself the misery. Sign the full custody surrender papers by Friday, and my mother will still give you $1 million to disappear. If you refuse, we will make sure you end up in a psych ward while my mother raises your children." A normal person would have been terrified. A normal person would have crumbled under the sheer weight of that psychological warfare. But I am an auditor. I am trained to look past the aggressive distractions and examine the raw data sitting right in front of me. I let my analytical brain take over. I tuned out the venom in his voice, and I ran a rapid, calculated assessment of Preston Hayes. I looked at his suit. It was a designer label, but the cuffs were slightly frayed at the edges, and the fabric looked rumpled like it had not been dry cleaned in weeks. I looked at his hands. He was nervously rubbing his left wrist with his right thumb. His left wrist was completely bare. The heavy diamond-encrusted Rolex Daytona that he treated like a sacred family heirloom was missing. I looked past his shoulder at the car he had driven. It was not a luxury vehicle. It was a standard bottom-tier rental sedan from a budget agency, complete with a barcode sticker still attached to the rear window. I looked back at his face. His pupils were slightly dilated in the harsh light. A thin sheen of nervous sweat coated his forehead, despite the freezing temperature of the underground garage. He smelled faintly of stale bourbon and cheap mints. Preston Hayes was not standing here as an intimidating billionaire. He was standing here as a desperate, terrified errand boy. He had lost his money. His massive gambling debts had finally caught up with him. He had pawned his watch. He had sold his car. And now he was doing his mother's dirty work in a damp parking garage because he needed her to bail him out. I did not step back. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, entirely flipping the power dynamic. "You are a terrible liar, Preston," I said, my voice dropping into a cold, clinical register that made him blink in surprise. "You do not have the money to bury me in litigation. In fact, you do not have any money at all, do you?" Preston stiffened his jaw, clenching tightly. "I do not know what you are talking about. You are delusional." I kept my eyes locked directly onto his. I am an auditor, Preston. You drove here in a budget rental car. Your custom Rolex is sitting in a pawn shop somewhere. You are sweating through a dirty suit because you are absolutely terrified of whoever you owe money to right now. You came down here to threaten me because Beatrice promised to pay off your bookies if you did her dirty work. Shut your mouth, he hissed, his face flushing a deep, angry red. You do not know anything about my finances. I know everything about your finances, I bluffed, pushing the narrative as hard as I could. Did you really think I only pulled the domestic insurance logs for the custody hearing? I saw the routing numbers for the Hayes Family Trust, Preston. I saw the Cayman Island transfers. I saw the Delaware shell companies. I know exactly how your mother is moving the corporate money. And more importantly, I know that she cut off your trust disbursements last month. That is why you are driving a rental car. She is starving you out, just like she tried to starve me out. Preston froze. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale under the fluorescent lights. His chest began to heave with sudden ragged breaths. He looked wildly around the empty concrete garage, as if expecting federal agents to step out from behind the pillars. My bluff had hit a massive exposed nerve. You saw the Cayman routing numbers, he stammered, his arrogant facade shattering into a million pieces. You saw the offshore accounts. I nodded slowly, projecting absolute certainty. I have the entire digital trail. I know Beatrice is hoarding the wealth and keeping you and Julian on a financial leash. You are 35 years old, Preston, and you are begging your mother for an allowance to pay off your gambling debts while she hides the real fortune. Preston lost his mind. The desperation and the alcohol suddenly boiled over into a blind, reckless rage. He slammed his fist against the concrete pillar, the sound echoing sharply through the garage. "It is my money," he screamed, his voice cracking with furious entitlement. "It is my money and Julian's money. My father left that $25 million to us. We were supposed to get equal control of the trust the day he died. She stole it from us." I stood perfectly still, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I did not say a single word. I simply let him unravel. She altered the damned documents, Preston ranted, pacing back and forth in front of my car, throwing his hands in the air. The original will left the entire estate in a direct trust for the grandchildren, with Julian and me acting as the primary executors. She could not stand losing control. She paid off that corrupt estate lawyer to bury the original will. She forged the corporate trust documents to name herself as the sole uncontested beneficiary. She stole $25 million from her own children, and now she is holding my inheritance hostage over a few bad poker hands. I am the rightful heir. The words hung in the damp air of the parking garage. Preston stopped pacing. He slowly turned to look at me. The blind rage in his eyes was instantly replaced by sheer absolute terror. The silence between us was deafening. He realized exactly what he had just done. He had not just confirmed my bluff about his mother hiding money. He had just voluntarily confessed to an active multi-million-dollar federal felony conspiracy. "You tricked me," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You did not know about the will. You were guessing." I slowly reached into the pocket of my jacket. I was not reaching for a weapon. I was reaching for the electronic key fob to my secure apartment building, which featured a bright red recessed panic button tied directly to the commercial security firm that monitored the property. Preston saw my hand move. Panic overtook whatever rational thought he had left. He lunged at me, his large hands reaching out to grab my jacket, desperate to take my phone, desperate to silence me before I could use what he had just confessed. I did not hesitate. I slammed my thumb down hard on the red panic button. Instantly, a deafening, piercing siren erupted from the concrete ceiling of the garage. Flashing strobe lights bolted into action, bathing the entire lower parking level in blinding bursts of harsh white light. A loud automated security voice boomed through the overhead speakers, announcing that an emergency breach had been detected and that local law enforcement had been dispatched to the location. Preston scrambled backward, covering his ears against the piercing alarm. He looked at me with absolute horror, realizing that the security cameras above us were now actively recording a high-definition feed directly to a police dispatch center. He turned around, sprinted to his cheap rental car, threw the door open, and sped out of the garage, the tires squealing wildly against the slick concrete. I stood alone in the flashing lights, my chest heaving, the deafening sirens still ringing in my ears. I turned around, opened my car door, and checked on my sons. They were both awake now, blinking up at the flashing lights, but they were perfectly safe. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock the screen. I did not have a recording of his confession. It did not matter. I did not need a recording. I had something vastly more valuable. I had the truth. Beatrice Hayes was not just a cruel mother-in-law. She was not just a wealthy bully using the family courts to steal my children. She was a felon. She had forged legal documents, bribed an estate attorney, and stolen a $25 million inheritance that rightfully belonged to my newborn sons. The emergency custody ambush was never really about my mental stability or my financial capacity. It was about control. Beatrice was terrified that if I stayed married to Julian and demanded our fair share of the family resources for the twins, my background as a compliance auditor would eventually lead me to the financial discrepancies. She needed to label me insane, strip me of my credibility, and sever my legal ties to the Hayes family before I ever thought to look for the original will of the late family patriarch. I looked down at my sleeping boys. Beatrice thought she could break me by sending her desperate, gambling-addicted son to threaten me in a parking garage. Instead, she had just handed me the exact map I needed to destroy her entire empire. I knew my target now. The original, unaltered will. It existed somewhere, and I was going to tear Beatrice's $25 million fortress straight to the ground to find it. The door to my secure apartment closed, and the silence of the room wrapped around me. It was no longer a place to hide. It was a war room. Preston had fled the parking garage in absolute terror, but his panic had given me the exact weapon I needed. The $25 million fortune had been stolen. The original will of my late father-in-law had been suppressed, and Beatrice had forged the corporate trust documents to seize total control. But knowing the truth and proving the truth in a court of law were two entirely different things. I had 90 days before the final custody hearing. Beatrice had limitless capital to drag that battle out for years. If I tried to fight her on her terms in family court, I would eventually run out of money to pay my scrappy lawyer, Harrison Tate. I had to cut off the head of the snake. I had to sever Beatrice from her stolen millions. To do that, I needed the original unaltered will. The problem was that the physical document was likely locked inside the impenetrable Hayes Corporate Holdings archives downtown. The corporate building was a fortress of biometric scanners, keycard elevators, and armed security guards. I was a locked-out daughter-in-law with no corporate credentials. I could not break into a corporate vault. But I am an auditor. I know that dark secrets are incredibly expensive to keep. Hiding a $25 million felony requires a continuous heavy flow of hush money. I did not need to find the paper will right away. I just needed to follow the cash that was paying for its funeral. I opened my laptop and connected to my secure cellular network. I reached out to a trusted former colleague from my old accounting firm. His name was Greg, and he was a senior forensic analyst who owed me a favor from our early auditing days. I sent him a secure message stating I was doing some freelance compliance consulting and needed him to pull the historical public tax filings for the 3 primary charities controlled by Beatrice. Wealthy families love charities. They offer massive tax deductions, public relations benefits, and incredibly murky financial oversight. They are the absolute favorite playgrounds for wealthy criminals looking to move money quietly. Within 2 hours, Greg sent me a secure encrypted file containing a decade of charitable tax returns for the Hayes Foundation for the Arts. I poured a black coffee, cracked my knuckles, and went to work. I cross-referenced the charitable disbursements against the standard operational costs of the foundation. I looked for the ghosts. In forensic accounting, ghosts are the recurring vague line items that never quite match a physical product or a tangible service. People who steal money always try to make it look like a boring administrative expense. It took me 6 hours of grueling line-by-line comparisons. My eyes burned and my surgical incision throbbed, but I finally found the anomaly. Every single quarter for the past 4 years, the Hayes Foundation for the Arts had authorized a massive disbursement categorized under external legal consulting. The payments were perfectly consistent and incredibly large. I traced the routing data from the tax filings to the receiving entity. The money was being routed to a boutique single-partner law firm that had supposedly dissolved its public practice years ago. I pulled the inactive firm's registration data through the State Bar Association database. The firm belonged to an attorney named William Sterling. I ran his name through the local obituaries and the corporate retirement logs. William Sterling was the original estate attorney who had handled my father-in-law's financial affairs right up until the week of his sudden death. Beatrice had not just bribed him with a one-time payout to bury the original will. She had put him on a permanent $250,000 annual retainer. She was washing the hush money directly through her tax-exempt arts charity, claiming it as a deductible legal expense. It was a brilliant, ruthless, and entirely illegal financial structure. I spent the next hour meticulously downloading every single ledger, every tax filing, and every proof of payment linking Beatrice to William Sterling. This was the undeniable proof of the ongoing conspiracy. If I handed this specific digital trail to the federal authorities, Beatrice would not just lose the family fortune. She would be facing a decade in federal prison for tax fraud, embezzlement, and charitable manipulation. I was hitting the final download button on my laptop when my phone vibrated loudly against the table. A calendar reminder flashed on the screen. It was time for the twins' 2-month wellness checkup. I saved the forensic files to a secure encrypted flash drive, tucked it deep into my diaper bag, and carefully loaded my sons into their car seats. The pediatrician office was a bright, cheerful clinic in a quiet, manicured suburb. The waiting room was covered in colorful painted murals of jungle animals and stocked with wooden blocks. It was supposed to be a safe zone. I carried the heavy dual car seat through the glass double doors, checked in at the front desk, and turned toward the seating area. My heart instantly dropped into my stomach. Sitting in a low, child-sized chair near the bubbling fish tank was my husband, Julian. He looked absolutely terrible. His expensive designer suit was deeply wrinkled. His hair was unkempt and unwashed. He had dark, bruised circles under his eyes and a pale, sickly complexion. He stood up immediately when he saw me walk through the doors. He raised his hands in a slow gesture of peaceful surrender. He did not look like the cruel, silent man who had stood by while his mother locked me out of my home. He looked exactly like the sweet, overwhelmed man I had married. "Claire, please do not run away," Julian said. His voice was thick with genuine emotion and unshed tears. "I just want to see my sons. I just want to talk to my wife." The medical receptionist was watching us closely from behind her glass partition. I could not cause a loud scene without risking a negative note in my medical file. Beatrice's lawyers would twist any public outburst into proof of my supposed postpartum hostility. I kept my face blank and walked over to a secluded corner of the waiting room, setting the heavy car seats down gently on the carpet. Julian followed me, immediately dropping to his knees beside the plastic carriers. He reached out with a trembling hand and lightly touched his sleeping son's cheek. A single tear rolled down his face and splashed onto the fabric of his expensive suit. "I miss you so much," Julian whispered, looking up at me with absolute despair in his eyes. "This whole custody war is tearing me apart. This nightmare has gone too far. I cannot sleep at night. I cannot eat. My mother is completely out of control and I just want my family back. I want you to come home." My heart gave a pathetic, traitorous flutter against my ribs. For a fraction of a second, the exhausted, terrified mother inside me desperately wanted to believe him. I wanted the brutal legal nightmare to end. I wanted the man I loved to finally stand up to his family and protect us. "What exactly are you saying, Julian?" I asked cautiously. My voice was low and perfectly measured. "I am saying we can end this entire war today," Julian pleaded. His eyes were wide and earnest as he looked up at me from his knees. "I spoke to my mother this morning. She is willing to drop the emergency custody evaluations. She is willing to call off the corporate lawyers and let us move back into the house. All of us together as a family. We can go back to the way things were before the babies were born." "There is always a catch," I said flatly. My auditor instincts instantly overrode my fragile emotional hope. "It is just a minor family formality," Claire Julian said quickly. He tried to brush it off with a casual wave of his hand, but his voice tightened nervously. "My mother feels deeply disrespected by what happened at the hospital. She just needs you to apologize to her for tearing up the check and yelling at her. And she wants us to sign a standard post-nuptial agreement. It is just to protect the corporate assets and guarantee that the boys are raised within the Hayes family framework. It is just basic paperwork. We sign it, we apologize, and we get our lives back. I promise you I will protect you from her from now on." The bright, cheerful murals of the waiting room seemed to blur and fade away around me. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together in my mind with terrifying crystalline clarity. Julian was not kneeling on this brightly colored rug because he loved me. He was not crying because he missed his infant sons. He was here because his older brother Preston had run straight back to his mother after fleeing that underground parking garage. Beatrice knew that I had seen the offshore routing numbers. She knew that I was actively hunting for the $25 million theft. She was a brilliant corporate predator, and she realized that her usual intimidation tactics were failing. She had sent Julian to play the repentant, broken husband to exploit my emotional vulnerability. The post-nuptial agreement was not a standard family formality to protect the corporate assets. It was a legally binding trap designed to neutralize me completely. If I signed a post-nuptial agreement drafted by Beatrice's lawyers, I would be unknowingly waiving all of my marital rights. But much more importantly, I would be legally signing away my children's rights to challenge the Hayes family trust in the future. They were trying to trick me into legally abandoning the exact inheritance I was about to expose. Julian was not just a weak coward who could not stand up to his mother. He was an active, willing participant in a criminal conspiracy to steal from his own infant sons. I looked down at the man kneeling on the floor. The last remaining shred of love I held for him vanished entirely. It was replaced by an absolute freezing resolve that settled deep into my bones. I picked up the heavy car seats, my muscles straining against the surgical pain I had trained myself to ignore. "I do not want your house, Julian," I said. I kept my voice incredibly low and perfectly steady, so only he could hear me. "I do not want your mother's empty apologies, and I will never sign a single piece of paper your family puts in front of me." Julian stood up quickly. His sad, pathetic facade instantly hardened into something cold, arrogant, and desperate. "Claire, you are making a massive mistake right now. If you do not sign this document, my mother will absolutely destroy you in family court. You will lose these boys forever." I looked him dead in the eye and let a cold, confident smile touch my lips. "Tell your mother that the days of her destroying people are officially over. And tell her I know exactly how she is paying for William Sterling's retirement." Julian's jaw literally dropped open. The color rushed completely out of his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in the middle of the cheerful clinic. I turned my back on him and walked straight through the wooden door into the pediatrician's examination area. The war was no longer about defending myself against a custody evaluation in local family court. It was about tearing the Hayes family empire down to its very foundation. 2 days after the confrontation at the pediatrician clinic, a courier delivered a thick cream-colored envelope to the concierge desk of my secure building. Inside was a gold-embossed invitation to the annual charity gala for the Hayes Foundation for the Arts. It was to be held on Saturday night at the sprawling Hayes family estate. 10 minutes later, an email arrived from Beatrice's lead attorney. The email was copied directly to the court-appointed psychological evaluator who held my custody case in her hands. The attorney stated that the Hayes family formally expected my attendance to foster healthy familial bonds. The email warned that my refusal to integrate into the family community would be formally documented as active parental alienation and hostile isolation. Beatrice was holding a legal gun to my head. She was demanding I walk into her fortress and submit to public humiliation, or she would use my absence as evidence that I was an unfit, isolating mother. I did not panic. I hired a bonded, highly vetted private security nurse through an agency my accounting firm used for high net worth clients. I left my sleeping twins in the absolute safety of my locked apartment. Then I went shopping. I did not wear the tired, practical clothes of an exhausted new mother. I purchased a floor-length emerald green gown that fit me perfectly. I wore my hair swept back in a sleek, immaculate style. I applied red lipstick. I looked like a woman who was entirely in control of her own destiny. The Hayes family estate was a massive stone mansion sitting on 4 acres of manicured lawns in the wealthiest zip code in the state. I handed my keys to the valet and walked through the towering front doors. The grand foyer was filled with the sound of a live string quartet and the quiet clinking of crystal champagne flutes. Hundreds of local politicians, corporate executives, and high society socialites mingled under massive crystal chandeliers. It was a display of absolute blinding wealth. Beatrice spotted me the moment I entered the ballroom. She was draped in a silver evening gown, wearing a diamond necklace that cost more than my college education. She immediately broke away from a group of wealthy donors and marched toward me, her eyes flashing with malicious delight. She had Julian trailing obediently behind her. She spoke loudly, ensuring that the influential people standing nearby could hear every single word. "Claire," she announced, her voice dripping with artificial pity. "We are so incredibly surprised you actually showed up. It is so brave of you to come out in public despite your severe financial struggles and your current housing instability. Julian and I were just telling the senator's wife how much we are trying to help you through your unfortunate mental health challenges." She looked around, making sure her wealthy audience was absorbing the tragic narrative of her unstable daughter-in-law. I did not flush with embarrassment. I did not raise my voice or look at the floor. I smiled a calm, devastatingly placid smile. "I am doing exceptionally well, Beatrice," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the string quartet. "Thank you so much for your charitable concern. It is truly inspiring how much energy you spend worrying about other people's money." I turned my gaze to Julian, who immediately looked away, unable to hold my eye. I took a sip of sparkling water and simply walked past them. I knew exactly how Beatrice's psychology worked. She needed an audience. She needed to feel like the benevolent, suffering matriarch. By refusing to fight her in the ballroom, I left her standing there to soak up the sympathetic murmurs of her wealthy friends. She was so busy reveling in her manufactured public victory that she completely lost track of where I was going. I slipped through this crowded ballroom, moving purposefully toward the grand curved staircase. I knew the layout of this massive estate perfectly. During the early days of my marriage, before Julian's cowardice had fully revealed itself, we had spent endless Sunday dinners in this house. I knew that Beatrice's private home office was located at the end of the east wing on the 2nd floor. I walked up the carpeted stairs, my emerald gown making no sound. The 2nd floor was completely deserted. The heavy mahogany door to her office was closed but not locked. I pushed it open and stepped inside, shutting it silently behind me. The room was dark, smelling of expensive leather furniture and polished wood. I did not turn on the main overhead lights. I pulled out my phone and used the soft glow of the screen to navigate the space. I walked directly to the massive oil portrait of Beatrice herself that hung behind her sprawling executive desk. I knew from passing comments Julian had made years ago that the wall safe was hidden right behind it. I reached out and pulled the heavy wooden frame. It swung forward on silent hinges, revealing a sleek, modern digital keypad embedded in the wall. I had to input a 6-digit code. Security experts always say that wealthy narcissistic people are the most predictable targets in the world. They do not use random number generators. They use numbers that validate their own massive egos, or numbers tied to their most closely guarded secrets. I stood in the dark office and let my analytical brain run through the data points I had gathered about the Hayes family. I knew Beatrice's date of birth. I knew Julian's date of birth. But I also knew what Preston had accidentally told me in the parking garage. Beatrice had stolen the $25 million estate and cut her sons off to pay for Preston's massive gambling failures. I typed in Beatrice's birth month and day, followed by the exact day and month her late husband had passed away. A red light flashed. Incorrect. I took a deep breath. I thought about the hush money payments I had found in the tax filings. The payments to the corrupt estate lawyer William Sterling had begun exactly on August 14th. I typed in 0814, followed by the last two digits of Beatrice's birth year. The keypad beeped. The digital lock clicked heavily. A green light illuminated the dark wall. I had bypassed a billionaire's security system using pure forensic logic. I pulled the heavy steel door open. Inside the safe were stacks of bound $100 bills, velvet jewelry boxes, and several thick manila folders. I ignored the cash. I pulled out the folders one by one, shining my phone light across the legal headers. The third folder was sealed with a wax stamp. I broke the seal and slid the heavy parchment papers out onto the desk. The document was titled A Last Will and Testament of Richard Hayes, Sr. It was the original, unaltered will. The one Beatrice had paid $250,000 a year to hide. I quickly scanned the legal text, my eyes jumping over the dense corporate jargon. My heart hammered in my chest as the truth finally laid itself bare. My late father-in-law had known exactly how ruthless and greedy his wife was. He had known that Preston was a reckless gambler and that Julian was a weak, easily manipulated coward. He did not leave the $25 million corporate fortune to Beatrice. He did not leave it to his sons. Clause 4 of the original will explicitly bypass the entire living generation. The document stated that the entire $25 million estate was to be placed into an ironclad, irrevocable trust designated exclusively for his future grandchildren. Beatrice was legally entitled to absolutely nothing but a modest monthly stipend. She had not just stolen from me. She had orchestrated a massive federal crime to steal $25 million directly from my newborn twin sons. I laid the documents flat on the leather desk. I opened the camera application on my phone and meticulously photographed every single page, ensuring the signatures and the notary stamps were perfectly clear. I had the smoking gun. I had the exact legal proof I needed to destroy her empire and secure my children's future. I was sliding the heavy parchment back into the manila folder when the sound of sharp, angry footsteps echoed in the carpeted hallway outside. I froze. The footsteps were moving fast, heading directly for the office door. I heard Julian's whining, pathetic voice filtering through the thick wood. "Mother, you cannot just leave your own gala," he complained. "The mayor is asking for you downstairs." Beatrice's sharp, commanding voice snapped back immediately. "I need to make a private phone call to the lawyers, Julian. That insolent girl is plotting something. I can feel it." They were 5 seconds away from opening the door. I shoved the folder back into the steel safe and slammed the heavy door shut. The lock engaged with a loud mechanical click. I swung the oil portrait back against the wall just as the brass handle of the office door began to turn. I spun around and darted silently across the room toward the connected private bathroom. I slipped through the doorway and pulled the door shut behind me, leaving it open just a tiny fraction of an inch so I could listen. Before I had slipped away, I realized I needed to leave a message. I needed Beatrice to know that her fortress had been breached. I needed her to panic. Panic makes criminals make mistakes. I had grabbed the heavy gold fountain pen sitting on her pristine desk. I tore a small piece of expensive corporate stationery from her notepad. I quickly wrote down the exact routing number of the offshore Cayman Islands shell company she was using to hide the stolen funds. I left the piece of paper sitting directly in the center of her leather desk blotter. I held my breath in the dark bathroom. The main office door swung open. The overhead lights flicked on, flooding the room with bright illumination. I heard Beatrice walk toward her desk. I heard the rustle of her silk evening gown. Then I heard a sudden sharp intake of breath. "What is it?" Mother Julian asked, his voice laced with confusion. Beatrice did not answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was completely drained of its usual arrogance. It was a hollow, trembling whisper. "She knows," Beatrice gasped. "She knows everything." I did not wait to hear the rest of her panic. I silently backed away from the door, moving through the private bathroom and exiting through the secondary door that led to the back servants' hallway. I descended the narrow wooden staircase completely unseen by the catering staff who were busy preparing the dessert service. I slipped out the heavy side door of the mansion and stepped into the cool, crisp night air. I walked down the long paved driveway toward the valet stand, my emerald gown sweeping the pavement. I had walked into her high society ambush as a supposed victim. I was walking out with the keys to her absolute destruction sitting safely on my phone. I made it back to my secure apartment just before midnight. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I locked the heavy deadbolt, slid off my emerald gown, and walked straight into the bedroom to check on my sleeping twin boys. They were safe. But I knew the illusion of safety was about to be shattered. I had left my handwritten note on Beatrice's desk. I had let the monster know that I was inside her vault. I knew a woman like Beatrice would not just sit down and accept defeat. I knew she would go absolutely nuclear. I did not have to wait long to see the fallout. By 8 o'clock on Monday morning, my cell phone rang. It was Harrison Tate, my scrappy family lawyer. I answered the call expecting to discuss our strategy for the final custody hearing, which was now only 4 days away. Instead, Harrison sounded completely breathless and deeply panicked. He told me that his firm bank account had just been hit with a catastrophic legal freeze. Beatrice's high-priced legal team had filed an emergency injunction at the crack of dawn. They claimed that the $75,000 I had originally transferred to secure my housing and pay my legal retainer was actually stolen corporate capital. By labeling the money as stolen assets tied to an active corporate espionage investigation, they forced the local banking authorities to lock down every single penny I had touched. Harrison apologized profusely. His voice was thick with genuine regret. He told me he was a solo practitioner running a small office above a dry cleaner. He did not have the massive financial reserves required to fight a multi-million-dollar corporate law firm for free. But it was worse than just a lack of funding. Because Beatrice had successfully alleged that his legal retainer was paid using stolen corporate funds, Harrison was legally and ethically prohibited from representing me in court until the financial dispute was resolved. Beatrice had not just drained my accounts. She had successfully stripped me of my legal counsel right on the eve of the most important trial of my life. I thanked Harrison for everything he had done and ended the call. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the blank screen of my phone. Beatrice was systematically destroying my defenses. 10 minutes later, I received an automated email notification from the pediatrician's billing portal. The medical trust funds that Julian had set up for the twins' routine health care had been completely terminated. Beatrice was cutting off the resources for her own infant grandsons just to ensure I could not access a single dime of the family wealth. Then came the heavy, aggressive knock at my apartment door. I walked to the security monitor and looked at the camera feed. 2 uniformed police officers and a plainclothes detective were standing in the hallway. I took a deep breath, smoothed my shirt, and opened the door. The detective held up his badge and asked to step inside. I kept my hand firmly on the doorframe and told him we could speak right there in the hallway. The detective looked annoyed, but proceeded to inform me that a formal criminal complaint had been filed against me by Hayes Corporate Holdings. I was officially being investigated for grand larceny, corporate espionage, and extortion. He stated that the CEO of the company, Beatrice Hayes, claimed I had illegally breached their corporate network, stolen highly confidential financial documents, and was currently using them to extort the family for millions of dollars in a bitter divorce dispute. I looked the detective directly in the eye. I did not cry. I did not act like a hysterical, terrified mother. I acted like a corporate auditor. I calmly asked him if he had a warrant signed by a judge to search my premises or seize my digital devices. The detective shifted his weight uncomfortably and admitted that the warrant was still pending judicial review. I knew exactly why it was pending. Beatrice had fabricated the entire story. She wanted the police to intimidate me into handing over the evidence before I could figure out what to do with it. I told the detective that this was a retaliatory civil dispute disguised as a criminal complaint. I informed him that I would not answer any questions without legal counsel, and I politely closed the door in his face. I locked the deadbolt and sank down onto the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. Beatrice was throwing the entire weight of the local legal and law enforcement systems at me. She owned the high society circles in this city. She had politicians and local judges attending her charity galas. If I tried to fight her on a local level, I would be crushed. She would use the police investigation to paint me as a dangerous criminal to the family court judge. She would use my lack of a lawyer to steamroll me in the custody hearing. She would take my children, and I would likely end up in a local jail cell on fabricated corporate theft charges. I realized in that moment that I could not fight her in our city. I had to take the war to a battlefield she could not control. I stood up from the floor, walked over to my laptop, and opened the heavily encrypted files I had photographed in her office. I opened the digital tax returns I had pulled from her fake charities. I opened the raw routing data from the offshore Cayman Islands shell companies. I did not bother drafting a defense for the local police complaint. I did not waste my time calling other local family lawyers who would just be intimidated by Beatrice's power. Instead, I bundled every single piece of evidence into a massive, meticulously organized digital dossier. I started with the original unaltered will of my late father-in-law. I highlighted the exact clauses, proving that the entire $25 million estate was supposed to be held in an irrevocable trust for the grandchildren. I included the forged corporate trust documents Beatrice had filed to illegally seize control of the assets. I created a clear, undeniable timeline showing exactly how she had altered the legal structure of the estate. Next, I built the financial trace. I attached the tax filings from the Hayes Foundation for the Arts. I cross-referenced the massive quarterly disbursements categorized as external legal consulting. I linked those exact payments to the inactive law firm owned by William Sterling, the corrupt estate attorney who had buried the original will. I mapped out the entire $250,000 annual hush money operation. Finally, I attached the offshore routing data. I documented the Delaware shell companies, the Isle of Man holding accounts, and the Cayman Islands transfers. I provided the exact account numbers demonstrating how Beatrice was systematically washing the stolen $25 million to evade federal tax liabilities and obscure the true ownership of the funds. I compiled everything into a single devastating forensic package. It was a masterpiece of corporate compliance auditing. It was clean, objective, and absolutely lethal. I opened a highly secure encrypted web browser. I bypassed the local authorities completely. I navigated directly to the official federal portal for the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. I filled out Form 211, the official application for an award for original information regarding tax fraud and financial crimes. I uploaded the entire forensic dossier to the federal server. I did not stop there. I submitted identical secure whistleblower reports to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network and the federal banking regulators. I hit the submit button and watched the progress bar complete the transfer. The files were gone. They were securely sitting in the inboxes of the most feared federal financial investigators in the country. Beatrice's local influence could not save her now. Federal agents do not care about charity galas or local society connections. They care about paper trails, tax evasion, and wire fraud. I closed my laptop and let out a long, shuddering breath. I had dropped a nuclear bomb on the Hayes family empire. But as I looked at the calendar on my kitchen wall, a cold, suffocating wave of panic washed over me. Federal investigations are incredibly thorough, but they are agonizingly slow. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division does not move overnight. They take weeks, sometimes months, to build airtight cases, secure federal warrants, and coordinate massive raids. They move with terrifying precision, but they do not move fast. I did not have weeks. I did not have months. I looked at the date circled in bright red marker on my calendar. The final family court custody hearing was scheduled for Wednesday morning. I had exactly 48 hours left. In 48 hours, I had to walk into that local courtroom entirely alone. I had no lawyer. I had no access to my funds. I was facing an active fabricated criminal investigation by the local police. Beatrice's high-priced attorneys were going to stand in front of that judge and absolutely destroy me. They were going to present me as a destitute, unhinged criminal who was extorting her wealthy in-laws. They were going to use my lack of legal representation to bulldoze through standard court procedures. The federal wheels were slowly beginning to turn, but they were not going to reach me in time to save my children. Beatrice was poised to win the custody battle on Wednesday, take physical possession of my twin boys, and disappear behind the gates of her massive estate. If she took my children, none of the federal justice would matter. My heart would be gone. I paced the floor of my apartment, my mind racing through every possible legal scenario. I could not ask the family court judge for a continuance because Beatrice's lawyers would block it, citing the infant's immediate need for a stable home. I could not reveal the federal investigation in local family court because I had no official confirmation from the IRS yet, and Beatrice would simply claim I was making up delusional conspiracy theories. I was walking into a slaughterhouse completely exposed. I stopped pacing and looked down at my sleeping sons. Their tiny chests rose and fell softly in the dim light of the nursery. I was not going to let that woman take them. I was not going to let Julian raise them to be cowardly, broken men. If I could not win the legal battle on Wednesday morning, I had to ensure that Beatrice's entire credibility imploded right there on the witness stand. I needed a stalling tactic. I needed to create a courtroom spectacle so massive and so undeniable that the family court judge would be forced to halt the custody transfer immediately. I needed an insider. I needed someone from inside the Hayes family to stand up in that courtroom and admit that the entire narrative was a complete fabricated lie. I needed to turn her own golden boys against her. I had 48 hours until I walked into a courtroom where a judge was fully prepared to hand my babies over to a monster. The federal agents had my files, but the wheels of federal justice grind slowly. I needed a stalling tactic. I needed a human grenade to throw directly into the middle of that custody hearing, something so massive and so undeniable that the judge would have no choice but to halt the proceedings. I could not just walk in and claim Beatrice was a criminal without an attorney to back me up. I needed an insider. I needed someone with the Hayes last name to stand up under oath and admit that the entire narrative was a carefully constructed lie. I needed to turn her own golden boys against her. I sent a text to my husband Julian from an untraceable burner phone. I told him I was ready to discuss the post-nuptial agreement, but I would only meet him alone in public without his mother or her corporate lawyers. He agreed instantly, eager to prove his worth to Beatrice by reeling me in. We met at a crowded coffee shop near the waterfront. He arrived wearing a crisp suit, looking incredibly smug and relieved, carrying a sleek leather briefcase that undoubtedly contained the legal paperwork designed to strip me of my parental rights. I sat across from him in a small booth. He ordered an espresso and smiled a patronizing smile. "I am so glad you finally came to your senses, Claire," he said smoothly. "Mother was right. You just needed a few days to realize how impossible your situation really is. Sign the papers, apologize to her, and we can all go home." I did not reach for his documents. Instead, I pulled a plain manila folder from my tote bag and slid it across the table. I told him to look inside before we discussed anything else. Julian sighed, acting heavily annoyed by the delay, and flipped open the cover. The smugness vanished from his face the moment his eyes registered the wax seal and the title of the document. It was a high-resolution photograph of his late father's original unaltered will. "Your father did not leave the $25 million to your mother, Julian," I said, keeping my voice low and perfectly steady over the hum of the coffee shop. "He left it in an irrevocable trust for our sons. Your mother paid an estate lawyer $250,000 a year to bury this document. She forged the corporate trust papers. She stole your inheritance, and now she is trying to steal your sons to make sure no one ever discovers the truth." Julian stared at the photograph, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I did not stop there. I slid the second document across the table. It was the confirmation receipt from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. I have already submitted the entire forensic trail to the federal government. Julian, I said softly. The offshore accounts, the Delaware shell companies, the hush money payments. The investigators are building their case right now. Beatrice is going to federal prison, and when they raid the estate, they are going to arrest anyone who helped her. I leaned forward, locking my eyes onto his terrified face. I am giving you one single chance to save yourself. You are going to walk into family court on Wednesday morning, take the witness stand, and tell the judge exactly what your mother has done. You will admit that the homelessness was manufactured and the custody petition is a fraud. If you testify against her, you might avoid federal conspiracy charges. If you stay loyal to her, you will go down in handcuffs right beside her. I expected him to be enraged at his mother. I expected him to fight for the future of his children. I expected way too much from a coward. Julian slammed the folder shut, his hands shaking violently. You are lying, he hissed, his voice rising in sheer panic. My mother would never do this. You fabricated these documents because you are desperate. You are a crazy, vindictive woman trying to tear my family apart. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor, drawing stares from the other customers. I am not testifying against my mother, he practically shouted. I am going to tell her exactly what you are trying to pull, and she is going to crush you in court on Wednesday. He grabbed his briefcase and practically sprinted out of the coffee shop, running straight back to the woman who had robbed him blind. He was a lost cause. But I had a backup plan. I had the older brother. Finding Preston Hayes was vastly easier than I expected. Desperate men have extremely predictable routines. I tracked him down to a seedy, dimly lit sports bar on the edge of the industrial district, far away from the high society clubs he used to frequent. He was sitting alone in a back booth, nursing a cheap beer, staring blankly at a muted television screen. He looked significantly worse than he had in the parking garage. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by the hollow, sunken look of a man who knew his time was running out. I slid into the booth across from him. He jumped, spilling his drink across the sticky wooden table. What are you doing here? He stammered, his eyes darting frantically toward the exit. I told you I am done. I am not doing any more errands for my mother. You are not here on an errand, Preston, I said coldly. You are here because I'm going to save your life. I pulled the same manila folder from my bag and dropped it onto the spilled beer. Open it. Preston wiped his hands on his rumpled trousers and slowly opened the folder. Unlike Julian, Preston did not immediately deny what he was looking at. He stared at the photograph of the original will, his hands trembling so badly the paper rattled against the table. I watched the profound realization wash over his face. The $25 million he had been begging for the inheritance he thought was tied up in his mother's strict corporate rules had actually been stolen from him entirely. It belonged to his nephews. But more importantly, he saw that his mother had committed a massive felony to keep him broke and dependent. She really did it. Preston whispered, his voice cracking with a mixture of profound shock and absolute boiling rage. I knew she was hiding money, but I did not know she forged the entire estate. She left me to drown in debt while she sat on $25 million. I let his anger simmer for a moment before I dropped the second document in front of him. The federal confirmation receipt. Your mother is currently under active investigation by the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Banking Authority, I stated calmly. I gave them the offshore routing numbers. I gave them the records of the hush money. The raid is coming, Preston. And when the federal agents tear through the Hayes Corporate Holdings financial records, they are going to see that you and Julian have been receiving disbursements from those fraudulent accounts. You are going to be indicted as a co-conspirator in a multi-million-dollar federal tax fraud scheme. Preston looked like he was going to be physically sick. I cannot go to federal prison, he gasped, clutching his chest. I owe terrible people a lot of money. I will not survive in there. I did not know about the forged will. You have to believe me, Claire. I did not know. Ignorance is not a defense in federal court, I replied ruthlessly, but active cooperation is. I leaned across the sticky table, bringing my face inches from his. I am offering you a way out. On Wednesday morning, you are going to walk into family court and take the witness stand. You are going to testify under oath that Beatrice engineered my lockout and canceled my insurance. You are going to admit that she sent you to threaten me. And you are going to tell the judge that she forged the trust documents to steal the family fortune. If you do this, you become a hostile witness against her. When the federal agents arrive, you can prove that you actively helped expose the fraud. It is your only get-out-of-jail-free card. Preston stared at these documents, his chest heaving as he weighed his options. He was terrified of his mother. He had spent his entire life cowering beneath her financial control. But the fear of federal prison and the raw, burning hatred he suddenly felt for the woman who had stolen his inheritance outweighed everything else. I will do it, Preston said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. I will testify against her. I will tell the judge everything. I nodded, gathered my documents, and stood up from the booth. Be at the courthouse at 8 in the morning, Preston. Do not be late. I drove back to my apartment feeling a dangerous mixture of triumph and absolute dread. I had my insider. I had the human grenade I needed to blow up Beatrice's custody case. But I knew the next 36 hours were going to be the most dangerous hours of my life. Julian had run straight back to his mother. He had warned her about the documents. Beatrice now knew that I had the original will and that I had contacted the federal authorities. A woman with her wealth and her capacity for cruelty does not simply wait to be arrested. She goes on the offensive. My confirmation came late Tuesday night, just hours before the final custody hearing was set to begin. My phone buzzed with an incoming text message from an unknown number. The message was from Preston. It was frantic and riddled with panic. Julian told her everything the message read. She knows I met with you. She knows I'm going to testify. She just called me. She told me if I walk into that courthouse tomorrow, she will hand my exact location over to the men I owe money to. She is going to have me killed, Claire. She is going to destroy me. I cannot testify. I am so sorry. My blood turned to ice. Beatrice had discovered the betrayal. She was cornered, desperate, and lashing out with the full, terrifying weight of her power. She had explicitly threatened her own son's life to keep him off the witness stand. She was ensuring that when I walked into family court the next morning, I would be completely alone. I did not reply to Preston's text. I did not try to convince him to be brave. Courage is not something you can force onto a coward. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter and looked out the window at the dark city skyline. The stage was set for an absolute bloodbath. Beatrice thought she had neutralized my only weapon. She thought she had terrorized Preston into silence and solidified Julian's loyalty. She believed she was going to walk into that courtroom at dawn steamroll, a defenseless mother who had no legal counsel, and walk out with my twin boys. She had no idea that she was walking directly into a trap. I did not just need Preston to testify to stall the judge. I needed him to push Beatrice so far to the edge of her sanity that she would expose her true nature to the entire court. The final battle was here, and I was going to burn the Hayes Empire to the ground. The cold, relentless rain washed over the city as I walked through the heavy mahogany doors of the family court exactly at 8 o'clock on Wednesday morning. I wore the same tailored navy suit I had worn to the hospital, completely hiding the compression binder wrapped around my healing abdomen. I walked alone. I had no expensive legal team flanking me. I had no cheering section. But I walked with the absolute freezing certainty of a woman holding a lit match in a room full of gasoline. Beatrice was already seated at the petitioner's table. She wore a flawless charcoal gray designer suit, her silver hair pulled back into her signature tight twist. She looked incredibly smug. Julian sat beside her, looking clean, rested, and heavily rehearsed. Their lead attorney, the silver-haired shark with the velvet voice, stood at the podium, arranging a massive stack of legal files. When they saw me walk to the respondent's table alone, Beatrice offered a tiny, victorious smile. She thought she had completely stripped me of my armor. She thought I was walking into a slaughterhouse. The judge entered this courtroom, his robes billowing as he took his seat at the high bench. He looked down at the documents in front of him, noting immediately that I was acting as my own legal counsel. He offered a brief mandated warning about the dangers of representing myself in a complex custody trial, but I simply thanked him and stated I was fully prepared to proceed. Beatrice's attorney launched his opening statement with devastating precision. He did not yell. He used a tone of deep manufactured sorrow. He painted me as a deeply paranoid, completely delusional mother who had suffered a catastrophic psychological break. He told the judge that I was currently under investigation by local law enforcement for corporate theft. He highlighted the fact that my previous attorney had his accounts frozen because I had allegedly paid my legal retainer with stolen funds. He waved his hand toward me, describing me as a destitute, unemployed, erratic woman living in a transient rental property, dangerously hoarding two fragile, premature infants away from their loving family. Then he called Julian to the witness stand. Julian swore to tell the truth, sat in the wooden witness box, and delivered the performance of his life. He looked directly at the judge, with tears pooling perfectly in his eyes. He lied flawlessly. He claimed that I had threatened him at the hospital. He testified that I had wildly accused his mother of trying to buy my babies, inventing a $2 million bribe out of thin air to justify my sudden departure. He claimed I was highly unstable, refusing to let him see his own sons and preventing them from receiving proper medical care. He begged the judge to grant them immediate full custody to protect the twins from my supposed descent into madness. The judge looked at Julian with genuine sympathy. Beatrice nodded solemnly from her seat, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Then it was my turn to cross-examine my husband. I stood up and walked to the podium. I did not look angry. I looked at Julian with cold, clinical detachment. I asked him a series of rapid, simple questions designed to lock his lies firmly onto the court record. I asked him to confirm that he believed I left the house voluntarily. He said yes. I asked him to confirm that he had no knowledge of any altered locks or canceled insurance policies. He swore under oath that I was making it all up. I thanked him and let him step down. I did not push him. I wanted his perjury perfectly preserved for what was about to happen next. The judge turned to me, asking if I had any witnesses to call in my defense. I call Preston Hayes to the stand, I said clearly, my voice carrying across the quiet courtroom. The entire room seemed to freeze. Beatrice's head snapped up, her eyes wide with sudden alarm. Julian stopped halfway to his chair, looking frantically between me and his mother. Their lead attorney immediately jumped to his feet, shouting an objection, claiming that Preston had absolutely no direct knowledge of the custody dispute, and that my request was a desperate stalling tactic. I turned to the judge. "Your Honor," I stated calmly, "Preston Hayes has direct first-hand knowledge of the exact events that occurred on the day I was discharged from the hospital. He can testify directly to the financial status of the petitioners and the specific origins of this custody dispute. His testimony is absolutely critical to proving that the petitioners have committed perjury in this very courtroom today." The judge frowned, clearly intrigued by the sudden shift in the atmosphere. He overruled the objection and ordered the bailiff to open the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom. For 3 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. I held my breath, wondering if Preston had truly caved to his mother's death threats the night before. Then the doors slowly pushed open. Preston Hayes walked into the courtroom, and he looked like a man walking to his own execution. His suit was severely wrinkled, hanging loosely on his large frame. His face was ghostly pale, slick with cold sweat. His hands were trembling visibly at his sides. He had not fled. He knew that the federal investigation was already in motion. He knew that if he did not get his testimony on a sworn legal record today, he would go down as a co-conspirator when the Internal Revenue Service raided the Hayes empire. His terror of federal prison had narrowly outweighed his terror of his mother. Beatrice stared at her eldest son, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She silently mouthed a threat from her seat, her eyes burning into him. Preston flinched, but he kept walking. He took the oath with a shaking voice and sat down heavily in the witness box. I stepped back up to the podium. I did not waste time. I went straight for the jugular. "Preston, I began my voice ringing out with absolute authority. Did your mother, Beatrice Hayes, order the locks changed on my marital home while I was recovering from emergency surgery in the hospital? Beatrice's attorney shot up screaming an objection, claiming leading the witness and relevance. The judge slammed his gavel, demanding order, and told Preston to answer the question. Preston gripped the edges of the wooden witness stand. He looked at Beatrice, then he looked at me. Yes, he choked out, his voice cracking. She ordered the locks changed. She wanted to create a narrative that you were homeless so she could file for emergency custody. She canceled your health insurance too. A collective gasp rippled through the small gallery. The judge leaned forward over his high bench, his eyes narrowing sharply at Beatrice. I pressed forward, refusing to give them a single second to recover. And why would she orchestrate such an elaborate scheme to remove me from the family? I asked. What is she trying to hide, Preston? Objection. The lead attorney was practically shouting now, his face red with panic. This is outrageous speculation. Overruled, the judge barked, pointing a stern finger at the lawyer. Sit down, counsel. The witness will answer the question. Preston swallowed hard. He looked like he was going to vomit. She was trying to hide the money, he stammered. She knew that as a compliance auditor, you would eventually review Julian's trust distributions. She needed to destroy your credibility and get you out of the family before you realized the $25 million estate was completely stolen. Beatrice let out a sharp, furious hiss, her hands gripping the edge of her table so hard her knuckles turned stark white. Stolen from whom, Preston? I demanded, my voice rising in volume to dominate the courtroom. Who does the $25 million Hayes fortune actually belong to? It belongs to your twin sons, Preston cried out, tears of sheer panic and rage finally spilling down his sweaty face. My father left the entire estate in an irrevocable trust for his grandchildren. He skipped my mother entirely. He skipped Julian and me entirely. My mother bribed the estate attorney to bury the original will. She forged the corporate trust documents to name herself as the sole beneficiary. She has been laundering the stolen money through her charities for years. She stole $25 million from her own infant grandsons, and she threatened to have me killed last night if I came into this courtroom and told the truth. The courtroom exploded into absolute chaos. Julian buried his face in his hands, openly sobbing as his entire world collapsed. The lead attorney backed away from the petitioner's table, looking at Beatrice with absolute horror, realizing he had just been used to facilitate a massive federal crime. The judge was hammering his gavel repeatedly, shouting for order over the deafening uproar. But the loudest sound in the room was Beatrice Hayes losing her mind. She did not cower. She did not cry. The meticulously crafted mask of the benevolent, wealthy matriarch completely shattered, revealing the vicious, greedy predator underneath. She shot to her feet, knocking her heavy wooden chair backward onto the floor. "It is my money!" she screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing shrilly off the high ceilings. Her face was flushed dark red, the veins bulging in her neck. I built the Hayes family name. I managed the social connections. My husband was a weak, sentimental fool to leave my empire to two unborn brats. She turned her furious, manic gaze directly onto Preston. "You pathetic gambling loser," she spat, her words dripping with absolute disgust. "I kept you out of the gutter. I paid your debts. You are nothing without my money." Then she turned to me. Her pale blue eyes were wide and wild. "You are a peasant, Claire," she shrieked, pointing a shaking manicured finger at my face. "You are a middle-class nobody who thought she could marry into royalty. You think you have beaten me because you dragged my weak, pathetic son onto a witness stand. You think this little family court judge can touch me?" The judge slammed his gavel down so hard the wooden handle cracked. "Mrs. Hayes," he bellowed, his voice booming with absolute judicial fury. "Sit down and remain silent immediately. You have just confessed to massive financial fraud and perjury in my courtroom. I am ordering bailiffs to detain you right now." Beatrice laughed. It was a cold, arrogant, terrifying sound that silenced the room completely. She smoothed the front of her designer suit completely, ignoring the two armed bailiffs who were quickly approaching her table. You cannot touch my corporate assets, Beatrice declared, lifting her chin with supreme delusional confidence. This is a local family court. You have absolutely zero jurisdiction over Hayes corporate holdings. You have no authority over international offshore accounts. She looked directly at me, a smug, triumphant smirk returning to her lips despite the chaos surrounding her. You proved your little point, Claire, she sneered confidently. But it changes absolutely nothing. I will immediately tie the entire estate up in probate and civil litigation. I will drag this through appellate courts for the next 20 years. The money is locked in my offshore accounts. You have absolutely no capital to fight me in civil court. I have all of it. You and those babies will starve in the street before you see a single dollar of that inheritance. I win. Beatrice stood tall, adjusting her diamond necklace, thoroughly convinced that her wealth placed her entirely above the law. She believed she had successfully outsmarted the system. She thought that because she controlled the legal battlefield, she was untouchable. She had absolutely no idea that the real battlefield was not in this courtroom. She had no idea what was waiting for her outside on the courthouse steps. The judge slammed his gavel one final time, the sharp crack echoing like a gunshot against the high ceilings of the family court. He formally adjourned the emergency hearing, but the chaos he left in his wake was absolute. He barked orders at the bailiffs to detain Beatrice pending a formal review of her perjury and admitted fraud. Beatrice's lead attorney, desperate to salvage whatever shred of his own career remained, immediately stepped between her and the armed officers. He threw up his hands rapidly, citing jurisdictional technicalities and demanding a formal indictment before his client was placed in handcuffs. It was a frantic, pathetic display of legal maneuvering, but it worked just enough to stall the local authorities. The judge, bound by strict procedural rules regarding spontaneous courtroom confessions, angrily ordered Beatrice not to leave the state and stormed off the bench. Beatrice simply adjusted the lapels of her charcoal gray designer suit. She looked at the bailiffs with utter contempt, brushed past her own hyperventilating lawyer, and marched straight down the center aisle of the courtroom. She truly believed she had won. She believed that because she had successfully avoided being handcuffed in that exact moment, she was invincible. I watched her walk out. I did not rush. I took my time. I carefully gripped the heavy handles of the dual stroller where my twin boys were sleeping peacefully, completely insulated from the absolute carnage their grandmother had just unleashed. Julian was still sitting at the petitioner's table with his face buried in his hands. He was sobbing loudly, the sound bouncing off the mahogany walls. He had lost his wife, his children, his mother, and his entire financial future in the span of 30 minutes. Preston had already bolted for the side exit, clutching his stomach like he was going to be physically sick. I pushed the stroller down the aisle, the rubber wheels gliding smoothly over the polished floor. The heavy doors of the courtroom swung shut behind me, sealing my cowardly husband and his broken family inside. I walked down the long marble hallway toward the main exit. The air in the courthouse felt stale and suffocating, but I knew what was waiting for me outside. The rain had stopped. The heavy gray clouds that had choked the city all morning were finally beginning to break apart. I pushed the heavy glass doors open and stepped out onto the massive concrete landing that overlooked the city square. The cold, crisp air hit my face, bringing a sudden sharp clarity to my exhausted mind. Beatrice was waiting for me. She stood at the top of the wide, sweeping stone steps, blocking my path to the street. She was not flanked by her expensive legal team anymore. She stood entirely alone, but she still carried herself like a queen surveying her kingdom. The wind whipped her silver hair around her face, but she did not flinch. She reached into her designer leather handbag and pulled out the exact same heavy embossed checkbook she had brought to my hospital room. She held it in her manicured hand like a weapon. "You are a very stubborn girl," Claire Beatrice said. Her voice was not yelling anymore. It was cold, sharp, and dripping with absolute arrogance. "I will give you credit for that. You put on a very impressive little theater production inside that courtroom. You broke my weak sons, and you made a local judge very angry. But you are fundamentally stupid." I stopped pushing the stroller. I stood at the top of the stairs, perfectly level with her, and I waited. I did not interrupt. I let her dig the bottom of her own grave. You fundamentally do not understand how wealth works in this country, Beatrice continued, stepping closer to me. She tapped the leather cover of her checkbook against her palm. You think because my idiot son confessed to a family court judge that you have somehow seized control of my empire. You have absolutely nothing. The Hayes corporate holdings accounts are completely insulated by layers of international corporate law. The Cayman Islands do not care about a custody judge in this city. The Delaware shell companies cannot be breached by a local subpoena. She opened the checkbook. She pulled the gold fountain pen from her pocket. She looked at me with eyes that were entirely devoid of human empathy. I am going to leave this courthouse today, she stated smoothly, uncaping the gold pen. I am going to call my corporate attorneys, and I am going to freeze the entire $25 million estate in civil litigation. I will file motion after motion. I will drag this case through the appellate courts until your boys are grown men. You will never see a single dime of that inheritance. You will be buried in legal fees until you are living in your car. You cannot beat me, Claire. I have the capital to bleed you dry forever. She began to write on the crisp paper of the check. I am going to give you one last opportunity to walk away with your dignity, Beatrice said, not even looking up from her pen. I am going to write a check for $3 million. That is $1 million more than I offered you at the hospital. You are going to take this piece of paper. You are going to sign the custody surrender forms, and you are going to disappear. Name your price right now, or I swear I will make sure you starve. I looked at the woman standing in front of me. I looked at the gold pen in her hand and the crisp paper of the checkbook. I did not feel any anger anymore. I did not feel any fear. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us until I was standing just inches away from her. I reached down and gripped the handles of my son's stroller tighter, feeling the solid, grounding presence of my children right beside me. I looked Beatrice directly in the eyes. I let a slow, confident smile spread across my face. It was the smile of a corporate compliance auditor who knew exactly how the numbers were about to fall. Keep your money, Beatrice, I said softly, my voice perfectly calm and crystal clear. You are going to need it for the commissary. Beatrice froze. The gold pen stopped moving across the paper. She blinked her brow, furrowing in genuine confusion. She opened her mouth to speak, to hurl another venomous threat at me, but the words died in her throat. Before she could make a sound, the sudden aggressive screech of heavy tires echoed across the quiet plaza. Right on cue, a fleet of 5 massive black SUVs aggressively jumped the curb at the bottom of the courthouse steps. They did not park in the designated spaces. They swerved directly onto the concrete plaza, forming a tight tactical semicircle that completely blocked the bottom of the stairs. The doors of the vehicles flew open simultaneously. More than a dozen federal agents stepped out into the cold morning air. They wore dark tactical jackets with the bright yellow letters IRS Criminal Investigation Division and FBI Financial Crimes Task Force emblazoned across their backs. They moved with terrifying coordinated precision. There was no hesitation. There was no polite negotiation. They began marching rapidly up the wide stone steps, their eyes locked directly on the woman standing in the charcoal gray suit. Beatrice stared at the approaching agents, the color rapidly draining from her face. The embossed checkbook slipped from her manicured fingers and fell onto the wet concrete. At that exact moment, a sharp, piercing chime erupted from Beatrice's designer handbag. Then another chime. Then a rapid, continuous cascade of frantic electronic alerts. Her cell phone was exploding with high-priority notifications. She reached into her bag with trembling hands and pulled out her phone. The screen was completely illuminated with a terrifying stream of automated banking alerts from the most exclusive financial institutions in the world. The first notification flashed across the screen. Account frozen by federal order. Then a second notification from her primary domestic wealth management firm. All assets seized pending federal investigation. Then a third notification from the international wire service she used to communicate with the Cayman Islands. Secure routing terminated by the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I watched the realization hit her like a physical blow. Beatrice's eyes widened in absolute sheer horror as she scrolled frantically through the cascading alerts. The federal authorities had not just sent agents to arrest her. They had executed a simultaneous, highly coordinated strike on her entire financial network. The federal banking regulators had slammed the gates shut on her offshore accounts. The IRS had placed immediate federal tax liens on every single physical property owned by Hayes Corporate Holdings. The Delaware shell companies had been seized, and their assets locked into a federal holding trust. The $25 million she thought she controlled, the fortune she thought was perfectly insulated by international law, was gone. It had vanished into federal custody in the blink of an eye. She had absolutely nothing left. She could not pay her high-priced attorneys. She could not access a single penny to bail herself out. She was completely, utterly bankrupt. Beatrice Hayes. A tall agent in a dark windbreaker announced, his voice booming over the quiet plaza as he reached the top of the stairs. You are under arrest for federal tax evasion, wire fraud, and the falsification of legal corporate documents. You have the right to remain silent. Beatrice did not scream. She did not fight. She stood absolutely paralyzed on the concrete steps, staring at the blank screen of her phone, her mind entirely unable to process the total destruction of her empire. She slowly raised her head and looked at me. Her pale blue eyes were wide with a terror so profound it almost looked like madness. You did this, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. I did not answer her. I did not need to. I simply turned my stroller around and began walking down the wide, sweeping ramp that led to the street. Behind me, I heard the sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking around the wrists of the woman who had tried to buy my children. I did not look back. I just kept walking forward, taking my sons away from the wreckage of the Hayes family, stepping out into the bright, clear light of a brand new day. The days following Beatrice Hayes' arrest were a whirlwind of federal indictments and breaking news alerts that completely consumed the city. The local high society community that had once worshipped the ground she walked on suddenly treated her name like a highly contagious disease. I sat in my secure apartment holding my sleeping babies, watching the evening news broadcasts detail the absolute dismantling of the Hayes corporate empire. The federal authorities did not hold back. They unsealed a massive federal indictment listing 34 counts of tax evasion, wire fraud, money laundering, and the forgery of legal corporate documents. Beatrice was denied bail. The judge deemed her an extreme flight risk given her extensive network of offshore accounts. I could only imagine the profound shock she must have felt sitting in a cold concrete federal holding cell, trading her tailored Chanel suits for a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. The woman who had tried to buy my silence for $2 million was now facing decades in a federal penitentiary. During her trial, she remained completely arrogant, refusing to accept any responsibility, blaming her lawyers and her sons for her downfall. The federal judge was not amused by her total lack of remorse. She was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. Her charities were permanently dissolved. Her sprawling estate was seized and auctioned off by the government. The vast network of Delaware shell companies and Cayman Islands accounts was systematically ripped apart by the Internal Revenue Service. Her $25 million fortress was gone, reduced to boxes of evidence in a federal prosecutor office. With Beatrice locked away and the corporate assets completely frozen, the Golden Boys were left entirely to fend for themselves. Preston immediately accepted a plea deal. He testified extensively against his own mother to avoid a lengthy prison sentence, though he was still left completely penniless, saddled with massive tax penalties, and banned from ever participating in corporate finance again. He ended up working a manual labor job in another state, constantly looking over his shoulder for the people he still owed money to. Julian, however, simply crumbled. He had spent his entire life hiding behind his mother's immense power and her endless allowance. Without her money to shield him, he was absolutely nothing. 2 weeks after the explosive courthouse showdown, Julian requested a meeting with me. He did not send a high-priced corporate attorney to demand my presence. He did not issue threats or ultimatums. He sent a pathetic begging email asking me to meet him at a modest public park halfway between the city and his cheap rented motel room. I agreed to meet him, but I did not go alone. I brought Harrison Tate, my scrappy family lawyer, who was now fully reinstated after the federal authorities cleared his firm accounts and formally apologized for the disruption. Julian looked completely unrecognizable when I arrived at the park. The arrogant, polished air I had seen in the courtroom was entirely gone. He looked exhausted, defeated, and completely broken. He wore a faded sweater and scuffed shoes. He sat on a cold wooden park bench, wringing his hands together frantically as I approached. He immediately burst into tears. He begged me for forgiveness in front of strangers walking their dogs. He told me that he had been brainwashed by his mother, that he had never truly wanted to hurt me, and that he desperately wanted his family back. He swore that he would change, that he would finally get a real job, and that we could start over with nothing but love. I listened to his pathetic performance without showing a single ounce of emotion. I knew exactly who Julian was. He was not crying because he missed his infant sons or his wife. He was crying because the money was gone, and he had absolutely no idea how to survive in the real world without a trust fund. He wanted me to save him because he knew I was capable of surviving. When he finally finished begging, I did not offer him comfort. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. I placed them firmly on the wooden table between us. I told him that I did not want his empty apologies, and I certainly did not want him in my life. I told him that these were the final divorce papers, along with a legally binding agreement granting me permanent sole physical and legal custody of our twin boys. I informed him that because he was currently under federal investigation and had committed documented perjury in family court, no judge in the state would ever grant him unsupervised visitation. I told him to sign the papers right now, or I would happily let Harrison drag him through a brutal, humiliating public trial where every single one of his lies would be exposed to the entire world. Julian stared at the papers, his hands trembling violently. He realized he had absolutely no leverage left. The threats were gone. The money was gone. His mother was gone. He picked up a pen and signed his name on the dotted line, officially erasing himself from my life and the lives of my children. I took the papers back, turned around, and walked away without saying goodbye. With the divorce finalized and sole custody firmly secured, I turned my full attention to the federal unraveling of the Hayes estate. The process took several meticulous months. I worked closely with the federal investigators and a team of highly ethical estate attorneys to untangle the massive web of financial fraud Beatrice had woven. The authorities recovered the original unaltered will that my late father-in-law had drafted. The document was authenticated and fully validated by the probate court. The late patriarch had indeed seen right through his greedy wife and his irresponsible sons. The court officially enforced the true parameters of the original will. The recovered $25 million estate was legally stripped from Beatrice's name entirely. The funds were consolidated, cleansed of their offshore attachments, and placed into an ironclad, irrevocable trust designated solely and exclusively for the benefit of my twin boys. The terms of the trust were beautifully strict. The money could not be touched by Beatrice, Julian, or Preston under any circumstances. It was reserved for the boys, education, their health, and their future adult endeavors. But the most satisfying moment came when the probate judge officially appointed the legal custodian of that massive trust. The judge did not appoint a faceless corporate bank. The judge did not appoint a high society lawyer with hidden loyalties. The judge appointed me. As a certified corporate compliance auditor and the sole legal parent of the beneficiaries, I was granted absolute administrative control over the financial future of my sons. I managed the investments. I approved the educational disbursements. I protected their legacy with impenetrable financial walls. I did not take a single penny of their inheritance for my own personal use. I did not need to. I had something vastly more valuable. I had my freedom, my children, and my professional dignity. The sun rose on a completely new reality for us. I left the anonymous corporate apartment behind and purchased a beautiful, secure home in a quiet, family-friendly neighborhood. The house has a sprawling backyard with massive oak trees where my boys can safely learn to walk, run, and play. The windows let in endless natural light, entirely banishing the dark shadows of the Hayes family legacy. My sons have a beautiful nursery painted in soft sage green, exactly like the one I had originally prepared before my world was turned upside down. I did not return to the grueling hours of a corporate accounting firm working for wealthy executives who view employees as numbers on a spreadsheet. Instead, I used my expertise to start my own independent forensic accounting practice. My firm specializes exclusively in uncovering hidden assets in high-conflict divorces and complex family disputes. I use my professional skills to help vulnerable spouses track down the wealth that powerful toxic partners try to conceal. I dig through the shell companies, the offshore routing numbers, and the fake charities to expose the truth. I built a thriving business ensuring that no other mother ever has to stand in a courtroom and be terrorized by fabricated financial ruin. I set my own hours. I dictate my own terms. I raise my beautiful twin boys in absolute peace. My sons will grow up knowing the value of hard work, honesty, and true independence. They will never be raised to believe that money gives them the right to treat other human beings like disposable objects. They will know that their mother fought an entire empire of wealth and corruption just to keep them safe. They are Hayes heirs in name, but they are my sons in spirit, and they are surrounded by genuine love, not cold corporate transactions. They will never have to wonder if they are loved conditionally, and they will never be used as pawns in a twisted game of corporate succession. When I look back on that day in the hospital room, I realize that Beatrice Hayes gave me the greatest gift anyone could have ever offered. By trying to buy my motherhood for $2 million, she forced me to discover exactly how much power I actually possessed. She thought she was dealing with an easily intimidated middle-class nobody. She learned the hard way that a mother protecting her children is the most dangerous force on earth, especially when that mother knows how to follow the money. Setting boundaries with toxic, wealthy families is not about the money at all. It is about refusing to let someone put a price tag on your human dignity. It is about recognizing that your self-worth cannot be bought, sold, or negotiated away by people who only understand the world through the lens of their bank accounts. You do not owe your submission to anyone just because they have a larger net worth than you do. Wealth does not grant someone the right to abuse you, to isolate you, or to steal your children. True power does not come from offshore trusts or diamond necklaces. True power comes from knowing the truth, holding your ground, and refusing to surrender your life to people who view you as an obstacle. Please share your own experiences with toxic in-laws and how you set your boundaries in the comments below. I read every single one of them. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story. And before you go, please drop your location and let me know where you are watching from and what time it is there. I love connecting with this amazing community. Until next time, remember that your dignity is priceless, and no amount of money can ever buy your peace. Take care of yourself and always trust your own strength.